Princess Margaret lived life unapologetically, on her own terms, and in death, she made sure to do the same. From her earliest days, she was the royal rebel, glamorous, sharp-witted, often misunderstood and fiercely devoted to the idea of freedom. And when the end of life was imminent, her last wish was as bold and deeply personal as the choices that had defined her. If what she sought in life was denied by the crown, then perhaps in death, the institution would finally grant her what she had long been craving. A symbolic reunion with the one figure who had truly seen her, the one whose approval had truly mattered, King George VI. Margaret wanted to spend eternity beside her beloved father, the man who had cherished her, protected her, and understood her in ways the rest of the royal family never quite did. His untimely death was the greatest emotional fracture of Margaret's life. Beyond just personal grief, it was an identity crisis that never fully resolved. And so, when it was time to choose her final resting place, she made her last act of rebellion count. She would be cremated. It was the first time in modern royal history that such a decision had been made. No elaborate state funeral or burial at the royal mausoleum, no ornate tomb among the sovereign of old, just a quiet, deeply symbolic farewell. On February 15, 2002, a private funeral was held at St. George's Chapel in Windsor. It was an understated affair by royal standards. There were no grand processions and no full-scale military honours. The mood was sombre and intimate. It reflected her desire for privacy, a stark contrast to the often intrusive scrutiny she had endured throughout her life. Following the service, Margaret's remains were taken to Slough Crematorium, an act that broke centuries of royal tradition. In accordance to her wishes, no family members attended the cremation. Only the Dean of Windsor, her private secretary, and a senior official from the Lord Chamberlain's office bore witness. It was a private ceremony, quiet and unassuming, and yet it carried immense weight. Was this Margaret's final protest against an institution that had asked her to sacrifice so much? Or was it simply a final act of autonomy, a woman reclaiming her narrative one last time? Initially, her ashes were placed in the royal vault at St. George's Chapel, but later they were moved to King George VI's Memorial Chapel, a small annex within St. George's, where they were interred beside her father and mother. This decision was partly practical. The chapel was a limited space, and only cremated remains could be accommodated next to the king's coffin. But for Margaret, the meaning was deeper. Frogmore, the traditional royal burial ground, was gloomy and impersonal to her. She yearned for something else, something warmer, more intimate, a space where she could symbolically rest her head on her father's shoulder once more. Margaret's final choices weren't merely about logistics, they were declarations of love, of identity, of self. And that spirit, that refusal to conform, defined her life. For decades, her story has been painted as a cautionary tale. The princess who couldn't settle down, whose scandalous affairs and high society lifestyle embarrassed the crown. But today, a different picture is emerging. Historians and royal commentators now see Margaret not as a failure, but as a trailblazer, a woman ahead of her time, a figure whose personal choices nudged the ancient institution of monarchy reluctantly, subtly, but surely into the modern world. Her legacy lives not in proclamations, but in precedent. For the better part of the 20th century, royal marriages were expected to be strategic, aristocratic, and class-appropriate. Love was rarely the priority. But in 1960, Margaret made a seismic choice. She married Anthony Armstrong Jones, a commoner and a photographer no less. It was the first time in over 400 years that the daughter of a king had married outside of nobility. The union stunned royalists and thrilled the press. Armstrong Jones was charming, creative, and firmly outside the aristocratic mold. Their marriage was a headline event, but more importantly, it was a crack in the wall of royal rigidity. And although the union ultimately ended in divorce, its legacy was profound. Margaret planted a flag for personal freedom in a domain where duty often trumped desire. Her decision paved the way for future generations of royals, including Prince Charles, William, and Harry, to look beyond aristocratic bloodlines and marry for love. In marrying Anthony, Margaret made love a legitimate royal reason. Her wedding wasn't just socially revolutionary, it was technologically groundbreaking. May 6, 1960, marked a turning point in how the monarchy engaged with the public. At a time when Britain was transitioning from radio to television, with media technologies booming, Margaret's wedding was the first royal ceremony to be broadcast on TV. Over 20 million viewers tuned in to watch the spectacle, ushering in a new era of royal accessibility. The images were intimate and immediate. Margaret in her dazzling gown, the grandeur of Westminster Abbey, and the romance of it all. The monarchy, which had long existed behind palace walls, was now reaching into the living rooms of everyday Britons. It wasn't just a royal milestone, it was a media revolution. Margaret's wedding set the template for public royal celebrations that followed. From Princess Diana's fairy tale nuptials in 1981 to William and Kate's global broadcast in 2011. She didn't just have a royal wedding, she had the first modern royal wedding. Margaret invited the world into the palace. And when the marriage did not stand the test of time, the couple divorced in 1978. It was the first divorce of a senior royal in over 4 centuries. And so, the headlines were scandalous. The public, already fascinated by her troubled personal life, devoured the story. But what was lost in the frenzy was something much more significant: precedent. The monarchy had long treated divorce as a near taboo. Margaret's uncle, Edward VIII, had to abdicate the throne to marry a divorced woman. And yet, here she was, retaining her title and continuing public life, after a very public split. It was a moment of quiet institutional reckoning. Margaret's personal decision contributed to the slow but necessary shift in the monarchy's relationship with marital breakdown. It's no coincidence that in the decades that followed, her niece, Princess Anne, and nephews, Prince Charles and Andrew, all went through public divorces in the 1990s. Margaret had already walked that path, and the royal family had survived. She bore the brunt of the backlash so that others wouldn't have to. The Countess of Snowdon wasn't just ahead of her time in her relationships, she was culturally progressive too. Long before royals embraced Instagram or rubbed shoulders with celebrities, Margaret was living at the intersection of royalty and pop culture. In the 1960s, while the monarchy was still seen as stuffy and outdated, she became a glamorous fixture in London's high society. She dined with the Beatles, danced with Mick Jagger, and vacationed in Mustique with the likes of David Bowie and Princess Grace. Her lifestyle mirrored the swinging 60s, a decade of liberation, rebellion, and reinvention. To some, this was scandalous, but to many, especially a younger generation, Margaret was captivating. She brought glamour and relevance to an institution that was beginning to look out of touch. Ultimately, she became a bridge between two worlds, one of rigid tradition and one of modern possibility. Her presence in the cultural vanguard helped reposition the royals, not just as relics of the past, but participants in the present. Margaret was the first royal to be perceived as cool. Decades before Princess Diana redefined royal style, and long before Kate Middleton added a modern touch to it, there was Margaret, the original royal fashion icon. Effortlessly elegant, immaculately dressed, and unafraid to push boundaries. She was one of the first royals to embrace high fashion as a form of expression. At a time when royal attire was expected to be modest, traditional, and bordering on bland, Margaret broke the mold. She collaborated with designers like Christian Dior, Norman Hartnell, and Balmain, crafting a wardrobe that was both sophisticated and bold. Her off-shoulder gowns, cinched waists, and jewel-toned dresses became the talk of fashion editors and society pages alike. She was frequently featured on Vogue and set trends that influenced both the elite and the masses. Through style, Margaret redefined what royal femininity could look like, not just proper and poised, but daring and dynamic. Her legacy is more than the scandals that trailed her. She challenged the monarchy, not through grand reforms, but through personal choices that rippled outward, influencing culture, media, tradition, and the institution itself. Margaret didn't wield power like her sister, the Queen, but in many ways her impact was just as profound. She did not break the crown, but she bent it ever so slightly towards the future. As the curtain closes on her legacy, we see Prince Harry in a different light. The modern spare has carved a path that echoes Margaret's in spirit, driven by love, shaped by trauma, and defined by a complex relationship with duty and independence. Where Margaret suffered in silence, Harry chose to roar. His legacy, still unfolding, is not one of quiet endurance, but of open resistance. Not against the monarchy itself, but against the machinery that surrounds it, against the press, the tabloids, the institutionally sanctioned media complicity that in his eyes consumed his mother, trolled his wife, and haunted his life. This is not just a story about stepping back from royal duties. It is the tale of a prince declaring war on one of the most powerful institutions in the modern world, the media machine. And perhaps this war will come to define the greatest landmark of his legacy. Margaret came from an era of the media's birth, marked by a growing fascination with royalty in the age of television and tabloid print. But Harry witnessed its evolution into something more sinister, a weaponized tool, a system that doesn't just report, but distorts. one that protects power and punishes defiance. And so, his rebellion is not just personal, it is political, it is public, and it is permanent. From his earliest days, Harry was a headline, a comparison, the wild card. While William was cast as the dutiful heir, Harry became tabloid gold. The wild one, the troublemaker, the flawed prince. It was a role he never auditioned for, but one the media wrote for him anyway. Harry watched the press devour his mother, transforming her into both idol and target. He walked behind her coffin, only 12 years of age, in full view of a nation already being shaped by the forces that took her. In Spare, he writes, "I was the shadow in the photographs, the blurry background, the extra, but the tabloids sharpened that shadow into a caricature, and it followed him into adulthood." Then came Meghan, and for a moment, the narrative shifted. The rogue prince had found his fairy tale ending. But it didn't last. The coverage turned swiftly, cruelly, and predictably. Meghan became a lightning rod. The difficult Duchess, the American outsider, the mixed-race woman who wouldn't bow quietly. She faced a relentless media onslaught. Headlines accusing her of everything, from breaking royal protocol to causing feuds within the family. Stories were published comparing her to Catherine, often with racial undertones and a clear bias. While Kate was cradling her bump lovingly, Meghan was flaunting hers. The contrast was constant and damaging. In the Oprah interview, Meghan didn't mince words. "I wasn't being thrown to the wolves, I was being fed to the wolves." And Harry? He saw history repeating itself. This time, in real time, with his wife and unborn child as collateral. What the media called Megxit was for Harry not an escape, but a stand. It was his breaking point, the moment he stopped playing along with the royal PR game. He wasn't just walking away from royal duties, he was walking away from a system that, in his words, failed to protect. The decision shocked the world, but to Harry it was survival. For himself, for Meghan, for their children. The press spun the move as selfish. The institution remained quiet, but Harry had drawn his line in the sand. The Duke of Sussex didn't just leave the UK to chase freedom, he declared war, and what followed was unprecedented. Harry launched a series of lawsuits targeting Britain's most powerful media giants. Associated Newspapers, who are publishers for the Daily Mail, News Group newspapers for the Sun, and Mirror Group newspapers. He accused them of phone hacking, unlawful information gathering, bugging private conversations, hiring private investigators to dig up dirt, and publishing lies. He didn't just file papers. He showed up, sat in the courtroom, testified, took questions, and made history. In 2023, Harry became the first senior royal in over a century to take the witness stand in a court of law. His words in court were searing. How much more blood will be spilt before someone puts an end to this madness? And he won. In December 2023, Mirror Group newspapers were found to have used unlawful methods to obtain information about Harry. He was awarded substantial damages. More than money, the case cracked open the inner workings of tabloid behavior, including leaked emails, payments to private detectives, and cover-ups that had gone unchecked for years. The Associated Newspapers case is still ongoing, but its implications are massive. Harry, alongside others, allege systemic privacy violations and cover-ups, reaching deep into the fabric of British media and governance. His memoir Spare wasn't just a book, it was a reckoning. Harry laid bare not just family secrets, but the media machinery that fueled the dysfunction. He called it the invisible contract between the palace and the press, where information was exchanged, favours granted, and individuals sacrificed to maintain the monarchy's public image. Harry accused palace aides of planting negative stories about him and Meghan to protect more senior royals. Catherine was allegedly shielded, while Meghan was smeared. He wrote of fabricated feuds, twisted headlines, and backdoor media deals that painted him as the villain. Spare was his truth, his fight back. For the first time, without a tabloid filter or palace handler, he told his own story. While Margaret was a rebel in whispers, Harry is a rebel with a microphone and legal firepower. He hasn't sought to abolish the monarchy, but to deconstruct the media political complex that props it up. His legacy is not about abdication, it's about confrontation. In a world where media influence is unchecked, Harry has forced accountability through courts, memoirs, and through sheer persistence. He has taken on the machine that for decades shaped the narrative of the monarchy and refused to be defined by it anymore. The Spare is no longer the blurry shadow. He is the disruptor, the whistleblower, the man who stood at the gates of the palace and said, "This ends here." His legacy still unfolding is not just one of rebellion, but of resistance, and perhaps in time, redemption.